So good morning for all. Good afternoon for our speaker, Professor Christoph, our participants, everyone who's watching us, whatever you are, welcome. My name is Victoria, and here as co-organizers of the working group, I have my colleagues Daniela and João, and I also have the pleasure to be between friends and colleagues. So today as debaters, we have Luis and Julia. Professor Christoph, it's a great pleasure to learn with you today on the issue of predictive criminal law, the tensions with the traditional conceptions of the liberal state. I must say that in our last webinar with Professor Carsten Mommsen, we had an introduction of the area, mainly understanding the idea of predictive policing and the challenges related of the use of big data and AI. So also a very interesting overview of the positive and negative impacts of using algorithms in the criminal justice system. So since the first webinar, we have had the joy of counting on the participation of friends, colleagues, and professionals from Brazil and also from other countries. So just to remind that all of our webinars are recorded and available on YouTube if you want to recommend it to someone. We have already 18 webinars available on our channel, so we are all invited to keep joining us in our next events. I am gonna quickly present our speaker now. Professor Christoph Burchard is Professor of Criminal Law and Criminal Procedure, International and European Criminal Law, Comparative Law and Legal Theory at the Goethe Universität Frankfurt am Main, and also Principal Investigator at the Normative Orders Research Center of the Goethe Universität Frankfurt am Main. And Professor, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. After your presentation, we will open a quick panel for questions, and our participants also feel free to bring your own remarks. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here, wherever here is in virtual times. So good to be in my home office, but it's great to join you in this talk. As we discussed earlier, it of course would be nice to be in Brazil, but indeed, for these kinds of virtual meetings and also to promote subject matters via YouTube, etc., these kinds of meetings are, of course, advantageous as well. Now, thank you so much also for the kind introduction. You said that you would like to learn with and from me. I would like to flip that around a little bit. It would also be great to invite comments, suggestions, ideas from your side. So you're always open to either use the chat. I'm not so multitasking capable, but I'm trying to monitor the chat to an extent. But if there's anything that you wish to know, try to wave your hand or use the raise hand button, and then I can try to see that. What is more, since Carsten Mommsen seems to have introduced you to this kind of subject matter already, maybe also use that to check on what he said. I'm afraid I have not seen that video. And I'm of course not doing to do a test or something, but since I might touch upon some of the subjects, or he might have touched upon some of the subject matters that I will address as well, I might use my talk to open the floor for some comments on case studies, if you wish, that he raised already, so that we can actually enter into dialogue and not do this like good old style frontal or teaching. I don't know what frontal means really in terms of Zoom, but the multi-tiled version of it. Since Carsten already introduced some of these subject matters to you, I will keep my introduction short. What I will talk about is what I like tentatively call predictive criminal law or predictive criminal justice, maybe. Would be a better term, whatever that means. I will come back to in a second, and how this kind of predictive criminal justice might have some tensions with traditional conceptions of what one could call liberal criminal law or the liberal state. Again, whatever the liberal state is, we will have the time to discuss that in a second as well. Now, of course, the determining term in predictive criminal justice, criminal law, is the idea of a prediction. Now, we all do predictions, or did predictions in the past. We always probably look into the future, try to determine what will happen, and then decide on that basis. So if we want to go to the beach tomorrow, we would try to get a weather forecast to see whether it will be raining. That would at least be what a German would do. I don't know whether Brazilians look to weather forecasts because it's always nice, but at least some kind of predictions should be there in place. Or if you want to give out a loan as a bank, you would try to at least run a certain prediction on whether you will likely receive that loan back. And that, of course, depends, for example, on the person, whether she or he is likely to be able to give back that money. Now, so predictions isn't that new. What is new to an extent is that we do today have two factors that make predictions more solid, that at least with what we are told, solid in two respects. First of all, we see a stark rise in computational power. So we now can run algorithms that in the past took ages, more or less, to truly run. And we've seen stark increase of data that we have available, and that is, of course, what we call big data. Big data means that you have so much data that the human brain is not able to compute that, to really see what big data, what the data means. And also it's a lot of data which seemingly is unrelated to a task at hand. So you could feed, and that is I think that's the core concept of big data, that it's huge amounts and at least at first sight not linked to a task at hand. For example, if you give out a loan, to what respect is it really important to learn what fonts, so what kind of graphic display of language font is on the computer of the loanee? Normally you would say there is no correlation, there is no link between the fonts that you use and the likelihood of her or him paying back that loan. Now, that is one aspect of big data, no correlation. And the fun fact here is that in terms of credit scoring, so the use of algorithms to determine whether someone is more likely or less likely to pay back a loan, there was seemingly correlations found between fonts on the computer and likelihood of paying back. The reason probably was that certain fonts are used in online gambling. And of course, if you do more online gambling and have that font on your computer, you're probably less likely to pay back. But that is also something that you can only explore once you have this anomaly that there is a link, a correlation between fonts and unlikelihood of paying back a loan. So this is what I mean with predictions. You use AI and big data to run predictions in the area of criminal law. Algorithms means that you use some smart setup of computers, normally artificial intelligence, whatever that is, another big term that we could discuss for ages. So smart algorithms that can sort through big data, find correlations that the human brain would not be able to determine, and then come up with some kind of predictions that you can use in the area of criminal law and justice. And my talk today then will be how, if at all, this use of predictions, of AI-based, big data-based predictions move the criminal justice system away from traditional conceptions of the criminal law as we apply it in the liberal state, seemingly, apparently, at least from a traditional understanding. Now, the first thing that I would like to do with you is explore some case studies where we can use or where predictions can be used or are actually used in this big area of criminal law and justice. I will then turn to the question of why we should do that and why it is actually being done. Then I will shortly address some of the, let's call it the internal problems of algorithms and big data today. So some of the setbacks, the negative aspects of the status quo. And my main argument will be here is that there are huge problems associated with that. But at least if you talk to computer scientists and the techie fraction, if you will, those who believe in predictions and tech, they will tell you that these problems can be overcome. So addressing the, let's call it the internal problems of this technology is not the strongest argument against their use. Maybe now, but in the future, we could use them more. So this is why I will then, in my last section of the talk, focus on some of the more fundamental, more the foundational problems of why there is a certain tension, I think, between the use of tech in the area of criminal law and justice, but also how we can maybe remedy these problems. So I don't want to sound too culturally pessimistic, although there is always the tendency, especially of Germans, I guess, to be always quite tech averse, and maybe also of being somewhat caught in a fin de siècle atmosphere, that everything is lost and we're constantly on the slope down. I would like to not be seen as too culturally pessimistic, but I would like at least try to give a certain warning of where we should not go and how we maybe can use tech to better our ways of dealing with deviance, criminal phenomena. So on my first subject, that would be some case studies. And this is, of course, where then I could also then come back to you or get back to you in a second. So if you have additional case studies, if you would like to know more on certain case studies, please raise your hand or fill me in. So the first, and I have two big case studies for you, which will then split a little bit into subgroups. But the main case studies that I will address is the use of predictive algorithms in sentencing, and on a second note, in predictive policing. The first, in sentencing, what is used already in the US is the use, in the United States, is the use of algorithms in the sentencing phase to determine whether someone who has been convicted of a crime is likely or unlikely to recommit in the future. So to predict recidivism. This is now a widespread use of, for example, an algorithm called Compass, which basically tries to give you a score of how dangerous or not dangerous a convict is. So to be quite clear, so we have still a very normal, if you will, normal criminal law setup. So there is a crime reported, the person is convicted of that crime, and once we have the conviction, you enter into a sentencing phase. That is at least how it's done in many jurisdictions, I think in most jurisdictions in the US. So you have first a finding of guilt and afterwards a separate sentencing phase. And in that sentencing phase, you now have various, if you will, variables that you bring into the whole story. Of course, there is issues like how grave was that offense, etc., etc. What do the victims say? But one ingredient in this sentencing regime is you check whether the convict is or is not dangerous to the community, or to rephrase it a little bit, whether this person is dangerous, not dangerous, because he is likely, not likely to recommit in the future, to again be sorry, that's my daughter. To be again caught in the criminal justice system. Now, that being said, so this is the use of these algorithms in the sentencing phase in the US. There have been important decisions on that, although we're still rather early in the development. But in one decision, probably the most important one on the subject in Loomis, the Loomis case, there it was decided that the use of these risk scores is of course not determining what the sentencing judge then has to decide. The sentencing judge is free to deviate, to make its own, or rather flip it around. The sentencing judge has to hand down his or her decision, which can be impacted by knowledge of a algorithmic risk score, but there is no direct link in terms of law. Another question is, of course, whether there isn't a link in fact, because if you, as a sentencing judge or someone who does the sentencing, know of a very high risk score, and then you decide, well, from my guts, I think this person is not dangerous, and so let's give him a very, or her, very lenient sentence, or let's bring the convict back to the community as soon as possible, and then this person will recommit. Of course, then there will be pressure on that person who rendered that sentence, because he deviated from the algorithmic risk score. So there is, of course, pressure on the sentencing judge to follow a algorithmic suggestion, but at least it's only a suggestion, or more information, more knowledge that you have at your hands. So this is at least the first practice case study in sentencing using risk scores. There are more elaborate versions that have been discussed in the literature, where you not only use algorithms to predict the dangerousness or undangerousness of the convict, but rather that you use algorithms to determine, let's call it, a fair or proportionate sentence for the offense. Now, initial reactions by many practitioners, or maybe not even practitioners, curiously enough, at least by academics. Practitioners are more open to that, but academics would be to say, no, every case is different, and it's basically impossible to use algorithms to really account for the individual circumstances of an individual case, so that determining a fair and proportionate sentence by means of algorithms is just impossible. The counter argument, and I think that is valid, to that is that although it's nice to think of every case as being individual and so special that it cannot be captured computationally, is just practice is telling a different story. Once you look to mid-level or even low-level criminality. So for your ordinary petty thefts or for ordinary drug offenses or whatnot, you have a very clear, there's clear criminological evidence that you do not, as a sentencing judge, enter into this whole range of an in-depth analysis of the case in all of its individual characteristics. Rather, you look to certain key variables and then hand out a rather standardized sentence. So first offense, second offense, etc. How many drugs, how much was stolen, etc., etc. So this is, there is, at least for low and mid-level criminality, ample evidence that the narrative that one looks to, you know, the case in its individual characteristics in each case is just nothing more than a narrative. Of course, if you go to like high-level criminality, murder, rape, etc., things might be different. So maybe we, and this is what for example Vincent Chow argues. So let's not turn to algorithmic sentencing in general, but at least we can do this as regards mid and low level cases, which is, I think, a sound argument to make, not looking to the high level stuff, but to the low level stuff. And this is where things could actually work. So this would be the traditional the possibilities of the use of algorithms, predictions in sentencing. A second bigger case study is the use of algorithms in what has been called predictive policing, or to take the next step, big data policing. The difference only being only inverted commas that in predictive policing you still use rather few data, whilst in big data policing you throw in far more information and then try to predict something. And what do you try to predict? Well, this depends on the version of predictive policing that you are running. Traditionally, predictive policing was location-based, so you tried to predict where a crime would be happening, and this is where then you would try to send a police car so that burglary offenses, for example, wouldn't be happening in that location, that spot where the algorithms predicted that a future crime would be happening. So here we see a deviation, at least from your traditional way of handling criminal law and justice. Criminal law normally, at least from this very German and continental perspective, is only looking backwards and only comes into force once something has happened. Then we try to repress that. Predictive policing is premised on flipping that around. You try to prevent, maybe even preempt crime from happening, and of course that is or could be quite appealing to many of us. So not trying to repress, but to prevent. So this would be geographical or local based predictive policing. The next step, next development would be to individualize that. So to look into who as a person is more likely to commit a crime or become the victim of a crime, and use algorithms to predict that. So that would be individual predictive or big data policing. Again, this is being used with seemingly not so much success, but it's being used, for example, by German police forces, by analyzing flight data and passenger data to explore whether there is someone entering the German or the Schengen area in Europe who is bound to commit a crime. Of course, this mostly relates to really big time crimes like terrorism, etc., etc. But this is the general gist of that idea would be to individualize whether someone is more likely or more risky, more dangerous than others, or maybe to flip it around, whether someone is more likely to become the victim of a crime. Now, to make things a little bit more, interesting in that respect, so far we always, or I was talked about predictive policing, predictive data policing as something that the state would do, but there are. It's easy to use this kind of technology also as a company, for example. If you want to establish a nice compliance programs which, again, a topic of its own, but to keep a very long, or to make a very long story short, compliance programs that would help you to prevent the commission of crime from within your company. It would be nice to know who of your employees is likely to commit, for example, a corruption offense. So why not use this kind of compliance and digital compliance programs based on predictive policing at the workspace in your company? And again, this is not yet fully implemented in many companies, but there are at least some tendencies to extend this idea of predictive policing from the state to private entities. And the gist of the idea is easily translatable, and also the algorithms are not really set on them being used from state forces. You can easily translate and transport them onto other entities. So that would be predictive policing, the idea to prevent crime, be it as the state or as a private entity. Of course, the last, and I'll just briefly mention that the last vision there is to an extent explored in the movie Minority Report, which you might have heard about. The Minority Report, we see a police force which is not repressing but preventing crime before it's, or actually preempting crime before it happens. And this has little to do with criminal law, good old style. Rather, what you would do is you would try to predict which of your citizens is likely to commit a crime, and you would individualize that. And of course, in that movie, you then can convict persons of crimes that they will commit in the future. So this is not only preventing future crimes from happening, but also convicting persons of crimes that someone predicted the person, the dangerous person, will commit in the future. So this is where, if you will, traditional and future understandings of police work or criminal law work joins convicting someone of future crimes. Now, you might think that this is completely spooky, maybe, or at least seems to be an antithesis of what is already being done. Well, not quite. This brings me back to this first case study using algorithms to predict recidivism scores. If you have someone who has committed a small time offense, but then the algorithms tells you that that this is a highly dangerous person, so you will convict this highly dangerous person to a very high sentence, then in effect, what you are doing is to, although it's terminologically a little bit difficult to say, but basically you would say, well, we have caught you for this, low-level offense, but we give you a very high sentence because we predict that you will likely commit more crimes in the future. So to an extent, the idea of minority report to convict someone of future crimes is already in that idea, to use dangerousness as a key variable in your sentencing regime. And if we are quite honest, that is already something that we do also in traditional sentencing laws, at least once we allowed sentencing judges to bring into the picture predictions, be they algorithmic or not, about someone's future. So these would be my case studies. In sentencing, in predictive policing, in minority report, and is there anything that you would like to add? Are there more case studies that you think about or that you were already told about? And I would really love to have comments because I always love a good case study. No? If you know some, you can also write me an email. That would be always nice to learn. Okay, so why second? So I'm going to the second section of my talk, and I really have to speed up a little bit, I think, watching my clock. But it's always bad having a professor doing like open style talks. So why would you resort to that? There's of course a lot of explanations. I'm not talking about reasons, but more explanations, so sociological. So I'm not dealing now with justifications, something normative, but rather something sociological or criminological. So why would you turn to algorithms? There is, of course, many reasons. Sorry, many explanations. So I think I'll focus on two groups. The first group is the suggestion, the narrative that algorithms are more objective, more neutral, and more effective, and that includes that they're cheaper than the use of humans. And what does that mean? And the basic argument is this. If you have humans in the loop, or if you have only humans in the loop, you will get all the biases that humans have being then, enforced on the decision-making process. In sentencing, that is quite clear, and this all comes from the United States, or much of this comes from the United States. The United States is quite particular in its criminal justice system, as it's quite established now that it is deeply racist, as it is deeply discriminating against racial minorities. So if you look at the figures, you are really highly likely to become involved in the criminal justice apparatus. And if you're a African American male between 20 to 30 years old, or maybe a little younger. So this would be in comparison to Hispanics and of course Caucasian citizens. And so there is this deep racial bias in the criminal justice system in the United States, and that then is of course being shown, for example, in sentencing decisions, or prior to that in decisions of prosecution authorities to prosecute a case or not a case, or how much sentence, how lenient or how severe a sentence will be. So once you have algorithms, or you bring algorithms into play, the hope, the narrative is that you can get rid of human biases and introduce some kind of objective, fair, neutral decision making. So, treating everyone alike and without looking, for example, to the color of one's face. Second problem in the US, because it's so racist, the US has a phenomenal and rather ridiculous amount of people behind bars. The prison system has exploded in the last decades. And this is not only a problem in terms of a social problem, but it also is a financial problem. The amount of money that the US, the states, or the federal level have to put into their whole criminal justice system, including prisons, is just absurd, to be quite honest. You look at the numbers, but this is quite impressive. Now, that brings with it the pressure to make the whole system more cheap. And you can do that by, or that's at least the hope, by individualizing risk scores. So people who are not dangerous, let them back on the street as fast as possible. Whilst, of course, the dangerous people, them we can lock up for a long time. But the idea to save money by releasing persons or not actually even bringing people behind bars in the first place, or releasing them faster, is a strong argument in terms of money. The same can be then used in the private business. So if you want to do predictive policing on a compliance company-based level, the idea would be not to have these huge compliance departments, which probably, since they're human, will overlook a lot of offenses. The hope of the story is once you bring in smart algorithms, you can prevent crimes committed from within your company before they are committed. And in doing so, you will save costs, be it from investing them into repressive internal investigations or by paying fines, etc., etc. So everything is more objective, neutral, and cheaper. So we have this wonderful new world. And this was, of course, not that was, of course, not a neutral comment of mine. A second explanation that one could link to the use of using algorithms to individualize whether they're dangerous or not, is that we can move away. Whether that's technically possible, that's another question, but at least the story is we can move away from discriminating against groups. So all blacks, young, male, they're really dangerous, let's all send them to prisons. Or all white professors with weird hair and glasses and some beard, they're all quite dangerous, so let's lock them up. That would be a group perspective, and let's move away from that and rather go on individualizing. That again, this makes your criminal justice system more fine-grained, more refined, and also then more effective and more efficient in terms of cheaper. If you do not lock up all professors that are white and have glasses, but only those who have, I don't know, weird virtual backgrounds with blue walls. And of course, blue walls are not normally causally related to dangerousness, but this is a big data analysis, so we don't know why, but blue seems to indicate that this person is really dangerous. Also because he wears blue shirts and blue jackets. So this is the beauty of big data. We find correlations, if we can even identify them, that we as humans would never have come up with in the first place. So moving away from groups and going into individuals would be the second explanation why we why we use individualized predictions, or we can use, should use individualized predictions in the administration of criminal justice. And what is interesting to see, but that is only a brief reflection, is that this neutrality, effectiveness, objectivity, going like on individuals and not groups, that's all quite reminiscent of how we conceptualize our traditional criminal law and criminal law. We traditionally conceptualize criminal law as the preventions of of harm, or in German, Verletzung von Rechtsgütern, whatever that is in Brazil, or in English, the violation of legal interests or legal goods. Yeah, we can do that with technology as well, right? We conceptualize traditionally the law as being objective, neutral. Again, perfect. That's a perfect match with how this technology is being sold to us. So this is there are quite striking resemblances in terms of what we intend to do, preventing harm, and how we want to do this by objective, neutral, and effective mechanisms. So the move to technology, I think, is quite, and this is the explanation now, is quite catchy, because it builds upon the very values that traditional conceptions of criminal law also appeals to. And this link, we need to question them. And if we really want to question the use of technology in the criminal justice arena, or that is at least one of my arguments, we need to rethink whether these traditional values of law and criminal law are really that what is characteristic of traditional liberal law and criminal law. Any questions on, or any additions, more explanations of why we use technology? And again, there is so much that we could say. There is a certain, maybe in the US at least, an almost political theology of the use of technology. So it has a strong cultural dimension of it. I cannot give you everything, but if there's anything that you would like to add, please come and tell me, because this is also, it's all quite important in this question of the why. Any ideas, additions? Thank you, Eduardo. Ofensa o bem jurídico? Probably that was too Spanish. Mosquito.
Hello, Professor Christoph. Good morning, and it's a pleasure to hear you talk about this important subject. I would like to, first of all, to mention that, like you can see, I'm a Black African man that live in New York. Right now, I'm close to Professor Eduardo Sardini's doing a project to develop a online university in Africa. And I would like to ask you, how, in your opinion, can we avoid to make mistake to judge someone by using those algorithms? Because I know right now it's hard and difficult to be young and Black in US. Is terrible, I can tell you. And I read in the past a couple articles that talk about how those algorithms make a lot of mistake, as you say, sends a lot of young Black African American to jail. In your opinion, how can we avoid make this mistake, but on the other hand, continuing use those algorithms? Thank you.
I will come back to that in a second, when I will talk about where the status quo is, where the problems of the status quo of the use of technology or algorithms, predictions in criminal justice are. I can only, at this stage, I just try to show we do use it. and there is normative argumentation in favor of using it. You know, it's more objective, more neutral, far more safer than using humans, far more individualized. Technology is better than humans, so cultural dimensions, etc., etc. But I take your question now to come to the next block then and talk a little bit of where we are at the moment. Is these normative appeals, objectivity, etc., are they really sound? And the answer would be probably not. So algorithms do make a lot of or have a lot of problems at the moment. And this at the moment is important because if we now look into why they are still causing problems, in many respects is because, or the argument would be that they're not sufficiently developed yet, so let's make them better. So that's not a foundational challenge against the use of tech algorithms, etc., predictions in the criminal justice arena, rather the opposite. We really should do that, but let's first invest a lot of money into them, including, of course, research money. And I would love to get more research money on that as well. So this is, of course, a self-fulfilling problem here. So the first problem or let's look to the problems that the predictions have, algorithmic predictions have at the moment. And they are basically all premised on how these algorithms work. And how do they work? Now you basically do this. You give an algorithms a lot of training data, and then have the algorithm sort through them and see whether there is any correlation found in that big data. And then we can, learn from that data in the first place. For example, if you look to the US, it's quite, they have good numbers. So why don't we actually give the algorithms the figures that the US criminal justice system has in place? What would be the problem to learn or train an algorithm on the basis of the US criminal justice system? Maybe Mosquito could
Thank you. So to be honest with you, I'm not very deeply familiar with all those questions. I only read a couple articles about it, and I can feel in my skin how dangerous to be here. But I'm not like this kind of specialist.
No, well, so basically the data in the US shows, if you look like to the prison population in the US, well, it's a lot of, or disproportionately far more African Americans, Hispanics than white Caucasian persons. If you give that training data to the algorithm will learn what? Well, the African Americans are far more dangerous than the Hispanics, and even more dangerous than the Caucasians. Because this is the data that you give to the algorithm, and that is what we call the bias in, bias out problem. So if you give an algorithm biased data, the algorithm will learn from that bias and will run the predictions based on it. So bias in, or to be a little bit less political correct, crap in, crap out. And this is a traditional problem. The solution to that would be, of course, either only give it good data or try to remedy the bias in the learning process. And this is at least what people will tell you. We all know about the bias problem. What we will do is we try to get rid of the bias, however that's being done. But this is at the moment a problem we have these biases in the data. So we have to purge that bias from it. But the basic principle is you feed the algorithm some data, it will learn from it, learn in inverted commas, and then develop a model that we can use and make predictions. And that is all based on the past, or rather the past as it is built into or represented by a certain set of data. Second point is there is not enough data. Give me more data. That would be the second problem. Still, we have to run all these predictions on limited data sets. So the dream would be to get more data. If you only have 1 or 2 variables, that is, in inverted commas, boring. So what you would like to have as much data as possible, so that these correlations that I told you about earlier on, that the human brain cannot really come up with, like which font you use on your computer, that is all, thrown into the game. So we have not enough data. We have this bias in, bias out problem, and finally the translation, the learning process of how you write the code also possibly bring with it some kind of bias, some kind of normativity, be it conscious or unconscious. If you have, as is mostly done, white Caucasian males doing the programming, it's more likely that they will bring in their own biases into the code. This is why tech companies today try to be more diverse into how they set up their programming stuff. But of course, if it's mostly male Caucasians who are studying informatics or computer science, then it's difficult to be really diverse. So these are the main problems. Non-diversity in doing the programming, there is not enough data, and there is this bias in, bias out problem. Now, to an extent, we all know that. And as I said before, does that really militate against the use of tech in the criminal justice system? I would argue at the moment, yes, but not necessarily in the future. And the argument that is normally made is, yeah, at the moment, situation is not really super, but let's, invest more money, and then it will be, at least we will be able to better that. So we are in a constant loop or in a spiral, development spiral, to gradually improve the situation. What is funny though is that computer scientists, some of the computer scientists that I talked to, they are all quite shocked to learn that their deficient codes are already used, like in the world. So the status quo is not really good. It's rather bleak. Nevertheless, if we really want to approach the subject matter in a more foundational way, we have to move away from this critique of the status quo, of the technological problems of the use of tech or predictive tech in the criminal justice apparatus or system, and we have to move into more foundational subject matters. Nevertheless, has that been clear? So why at the moment these predictions have some problem, face some problems? Which is not to say that they might not actually be in some cases more effective. I'm just saying they have from the very setup inbuilt problems coming along with it. So what is then the real problem, or Ricardo?
Hello, Professor. Thank you for the explanation. My question is about is more intrinsic, like who writes the algorithm? Because I am I understand that we have to take care of the selection that begins, the selectivity of the criminal law begins in the building of the law, the law. You know, I like very much the Hirschheimer Marxist theories of the critical criminology and the punishment and social structure. So if you understand that our laws are driving the selectivity from some groups, and so you can imagine that the writing of the algorithms will persist on that bias. So for me, you're completely right. The data is absolutely tainted. It's impossible for us to cut off this bias, this tendency of giving more heavy punishment to some groups. But what I ask you is, who writes the algorithms, and how can we deal with the selectivity of the system himself that points for some clients, like we say here in Brazil? Thank you.
That's a wonderful question. So I'll answer them now because I wanted to come back to them or get back to them in a second, but let me answer them now because I think they're crucial. The question is not only who writes the actual algorithm or but also who collects the data. So it's both I think which we need to address in that respect. And of course, this now opens a completely new field of investigation about the who writes. It depends. In the United States, it's mostly private companies. So what we see here is a privatization of formerly state-run affairs. For example, in the good old times, it was a judge, ergo a state official who did the sentencing all by himself, more or less, or herself. But now we have more and more private companies entering this field, pretending to be objective, neutral, etc. But of course, they're not objective. They're not true neutral. They want to make money, and that is in our capitalist way of living an acceptable motive, which then brings about the question: do we need to regulate them? To what oversight do we need if we want to use or resort to their codes? What kind of oversight, democratic oversight, individual rights-based oversight do we want over their codes? And this is, of course, a huge new field, regulation of privately produced code. And not only to make things even more complicated on a transnational level, because, for example, Germany is very uses algorithms that are produced by US companies like Palantir, etc. So this is getting into a new field of regulation and democratic oversight. So big new topic, which to an extent then collides with copyright problems. And not only copyright, but also company secrets that you want to protect. In the United States, this Compass algorithm that I was referring to, so this handing out of risk scores, is proprietary, meaning it is secret. And the argument is, we put a lot of effort into producing that code and coming up with these very nice predictions. If we made that public, others would just copy paste that, and all our efforts are gone. So there is not only a problem of regulation, how regulation is done, but also the protection of business secrets. That is the first level problem. The second level problem, even if we now turn to an open and transparent way of doing writing the code. So we come up with new agencies that do democratic oversights over coding, etc., etc. In my eyes, what you do change fundamentally is how you actually talk about these subject matters. In the past, you would be able to talk on these matters or in terms of, for example, Marxist theories, or in terms of justice, Kantian, at least, but in a certain understandable language. In the future, you would need to, and I don't know whether I'm incapable of that. We'll see whether the future will bring it with the new generations who are capable of talking code. But in the future, the way you would need to deal with these issues would not be in terms of principles and in terms of natural language, but rather in terms of how this is then fed into certain codes or algorithms. So it brings with it this change, this transformation of language, which then, of course, again privileges elites, because it's probably will only be elites who will be able to understand, if at all, who are capable of understanding that. Now, counter argument, I always try to be fair here. Counter argument is no. We are already working on technology that translates code into natural language. So that would be the next step of democratizing, if you will, also the language of the use of technology in the criminal justice system. But again, these are huge transformations that you might be losing sight of if you're not really looking carefully at it. So that is only the who writes and how we do address that. As I try to explain, these algorithms, at least if you use traditional ways of machine learning, etc., are based on the way on your established data set, the data you have and that you feed into them, and data that you feed into algorithms are either not a full representation of reality. So there is this tendency that only stuff that you can actually filter into or put into data is then really represented in algorithms. So that brings with a certain problem of, if you will, a datafication of the real world. But there's also the problem that at least historical data is always charged with certain normative preconceptions. I talked about bias. The counter argument is that we need to be a little bit more fair. It's not only bias, it's also values. And one person's bias is another person's value. Of course, it's very difficult to say this, but imagine you're being a white supremacist. Then you would probably say, well, brilliant. All the African Americans are in prison. And it's my power now to use these algorithms to preserve the past into the future. And now this is a very crass example, and always bring this to make people like alert and say, well, now he's going totally crazy. But nevertheless, we also need to check whether there is something positive in certain or that the society considers as positive in certain data sets. This is a big topic in Europe now, since Europe has lost the race for good AI to the US and China for good. And what we try to come up now in Europe is ethical AI. And ethical AI means is that we all now want to follow certain values, but values it's a tricky thing. So what is good to preserve and what is not good to preserve? this is what also something that we need to discuss. Again, it's not only bias, it's also about values, but you know, the distinction between bias and value is not as overt as you would think. Collecting the data and how we interpret that data is again something that we need to open up ourselves to if we want to use technology and predictions in the criminal justice system. We have to have a far more clear perspective on what data we use and how we, you know, rate it. And there are people who in honesty say, for example, well, if the data says that, you know, African-American young males are very likely to commit crime, or that data is objective, so we have to implement that. Now, the argument would be, no, that data is biased from its very start, racist, everything. But nevertheless, you have to challenge that assumption that data is non-normative, and that is a huge problem. And of course, the Marxist story is easy to read into that. It's the privileged who gather that data, commercialize the data. There's a new Marxian, of course, twist to that. It's not the production of goods that is today at the center of wealth. It's the gathering of data, because this is where you get the money from, and this is what Shoshana Zuboff calls capitalism, surveillance capitalism. So data gathering capitalism, gather as much data as possible, and that is only, sorry to make it a little bit even more complex, this is only the story for the US. If you bring in China, things get even, you know, that's a new story, because the distinction between state and private sector is no longer there. So this is where an authoritarian regime can gather the data, write the code, and of course then implement its social policies through that. And the beauty of it, please, inverted commas, the beauty of it is that you finally get rid of intermediate actors like judges who might deviate from your central idea. You can finally govern through. Is that possible to say, govern through, durchregieren? So you can finally, you know, get your governance to the citizens immediately. You don't have to have to use intermediate steps to do so. Now I'm deeply into the discussion of what's really problematic in my eyes of the use of predictions. So I will just mention 2 or 3 more points, and then my time is up for good anyhow. So I'll try to be brief. So one problem that I see on a very foundational level is the idea of future. Now, if we have the idea of future is, I think, normally I would say a future is something open, is something that we are unsure about, that we're uncertain about, but which also gives possibilities. In a system that runs on predictions, we are rather trying to preserve the past. So the past, as it is manifested, represented in certain data sets, is reproduced in the present, because we in the present render decisions that are based on predictions. And so this is a nice, with commas again, loop. If we would live in a society which is perfect, if we would live in a society where the past is where we want to, which we want to represent and reestablish into the future, that would be a sound way of doing things. From a normative perspective, I'm not sure whether we do live all in societies that in the past or in the present are perfect. which cannot be made better. The value of an open future is something that we need to discuss. But of course, in the criminal law system, this is quite a challenge to say, well, you know, there is a value in deviation. There is a value of people being killed. There is a value of people being raped, because this allows us to think about the future, to think about whether we want to re-establish these values all the time. That's really difficult, a real challenge. And the counter argument, the traditional counter argument would be, no, we have to prevent crime by means of criminal law. So it's not the allowing of deviations from happening, it's rather the repression of deviation that we traditionally assume the criminal law is about. And this is why these predictions run on a narrative of being so effective in doing so, because the strength of the tech argument would be, we're not only guaranteeing a normative future, thou shalt not kill. What we guarantee is a factual future, thou wilt not be killed, or thou wilt not kill. Factuality, certainty about a certain future is I think the true challenge that we have to meet when we address this this new technology, whether we want to keep our future more open, or whether we are certain that certain values are well protected as established, for example, in our criminal codes. A second problem that I see is a value that we all use lightly, but which, if we go into that a little bit more closely, it's getting shaky, and that is trust. Now, from a traditional perspective, you would say, well, I do all trust you. I have to trust you to an extent. In this case, it's quite easy to trust you because I'm pretty sure that no one will kill you, that no one will kill me for obvious Zoom reasons. But if we would be in a room together, who can tell me that there isn't someone with a gun in the room and who will likely kill me? Nevertheless, in order to interact, to give talks, to travel to Brazil in the future and be in the room with you, to an extent, I have to trust you. But is that a normative value, or is that something that we only resort to because we have to? The promise of technology is that we finally can go to a zero trust paradigm. I don't have to trust you because I checked you algorithmically. You're all not dangerous, all low risk scores, so I'm happy to be in the room with you. Now, this is also, of course, a little bit a drastic example, but if we look into the idea of using risk scores in sentencing, there is no longer something like a presumption of not being dangerous. There is a presumption of someone being a possible risk. So we have to evaluate that risk. And either people are non-dangerous or dangerous in that evaluation, and then, or assessment, and then we take it from there. So the traditional understanding of trust, also of a presumption that the other is non-risky, or all that might be flipped around in a society that is only run or mostly run on predictions, because there, at least from a culturally pessimistic point of view, you would transform the other into a constant risk that we can finally check and evaluate. Coming back to the very first example, check yourself that I gave. Landing out alone. Would you give me 1 million euros or 1 million US dollars just on my nice face? Probably you would say, well, let's check whether he is able to pay me back. And once that enters the equation in the criminal law division, we can capitalize on that easily let's see whether this person is dangerous or not dangerous, whether he will commit crimes in the future or not, be it in sentencing, be it in predictive police. Two more points and then I'm done for good. The whole system, that's an other problem, is making worse something that we already see, of course, in the criminal justice system, and this is not addressing the causes of crime, the roots of crime, but only the symptoms. So, you know, we do not use predictions or tech to explore why someone commits crimes, only that he will likely or not likely commit crime. So it's like fighting a pandemic and patient zeros. We're not dealing with the pandemic as such or why a new virus gets into the system, but rather we want to remove dangerous persons from the equation. So again, we have that already. I mean, in most criminal justice systems are not really addressing the causes of crime. They are trying to fight the symptoms of crimes. They are fighting the symptoms of these roots, that is crime. But this kind of textile criminal justice system might make things worse because it's set to say it's the only way of doing so. Now, one last sentence, maybe two. So is that also bad, what is happening? Well, this depends a lot of how you see the world and how you see the role of tech and how you see the role of humans in the criminal justice system. If you're a Black or an African-American male in the United States, I don't know whether I would say I'd rather have me judged by a human judge or an algorithm. So this would be maybe not so clear-cut my decision. The individual choices are really depend on how you see the world and where you come from and how you fit yourself into a certain social context. So this, one has to remember, if we want to not be completely cultural tech pessimistic, then we have to also appreciate that technology is in our hands. It's no like supercomputer which controls the world in the background, and there's no big conspiracy in my eyes going on to turn the world into something really bad. It's rather our job as democratic citizens to shape the world and how we use technology. And there are ways, for example, to use technology to make judges aware of their own biases, to check and balance human decision making. So tech as such is not bad. We have to, well, and that is a big task, but we have to use it in a way that it will not make present disadvantages of the criminal justice system even worse, but rather to use it to reform the criminal justice system, or even to question the criminal justice system as such, to implement social goals. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm sorry that I took far more time than I wanted to.
Thank you so much, Professor Christoph, for the enlightening presentation. So I have my own remarks about the use of algorithms for a kind of risk assessment, mainly the private use. But before I present my own question, I see here that we have a great audience. So I'd like to greet the audience from Brazil. I see our colleagues from the working group. I see our colleagues from Angola, Laurindo and Garrido. Also, Professor Julia Gracia, Dr. Haria, Judge Ricardo, great pleasure to have all of you here. And Professor Nina Gardner, we really appreciate your presence here today too. It's an honor to have all these experts among us. So your participation makes all the difference to our initiative to bring the business and human rights agenda to the table. So I see that very high level presentation raised a lot of questions. Maybe we can start this panel of questions with our debaters, Julia and Luis, and also Mateus. I see here a question on the chat. And please, all of our participants, feel free to open your cameras and microphones and present your questions too.
Okay, so should I start? Mateus has been waiting for so long.
Oh, I can wait a little more. Don't wait. Don't
Okay.
worry.
Right. It's just that I really don't even know where to start. Maybe I will start with the longest question. But anyways, first of all, thank you to the organizers, so João, Dani, and Vitória, and also Professor Eduardo for granting me the opportunity of being here today to debate such incredible and important and also urgent theme, right? And also thank you, Professor Burchard. And I will call you Burchard, I'm sorry. It's just that the English and then German thing kind of messes me up. But anyways, and thank you for your presentation. It's really brilliant to hear your take on the subject. And I got many insights from it and also thoughts. But something that always gets me and that I would like to address is basically that, as you mentioned, in the last few years, we have seen some efforts to use technology, for instance, in predictive criminology, and also we should see more of that in the years to come. And of course, there are many pros and cons in the use of technology, but I would like to ask you actually about what do you think is the correct point of balance, I would say, in which it is better to use the technology instead of not using it. In other words, what do you think that could be the metrics for us to know we're going in the right path? And I bring this up actually because, for example, you're a German professor and the European Commission has drafted a proposal of regulation to AI. And the proposal is deeply risk-oriented. So maybe if we cannot answer this question, then how can we really know if AI is being correctly regulated and used or not? And maybe we could also raise the question that is, does it even make sense to regulate AI in criminal law through risk assessments? Is there something different about it or not? And by the way, the European Commission's proposal also aims to build excellence in the development of AI and new technologies, but also to build trust. And it's curious to me, this trust thing, because I wonder what kind of trust are we trying to build here? Because for instance, could AI, because it processes a ton amount of data, somehow violate human rights? Yes, possibly, but let's say there is some kind of predictive policing, some new great algorithm that actually helps and can provide more security to citizens. And I mean, I wonder if when there is more security to citizens, then of course human rights are enforced, right? So does it make sense to stop using this technology because people's privacy might be violated, for example? I mean, the trade-off is not exactly let's not use this technology so we won't hurt people's privacy. The trade-off seems to be more like let's not make policy more effective so we won't hurt people's privacy, you know? Not to mention that even, for example, industrial machines or airplanes to this day are subject to accidents because of many reasons, but mainly because it's designed by humans and very often operated by humans. So why do we trust airplanes and industrial machines and we don't trust artificial intelligence? And what is the difference between AI and these other technologies? Because these are all technologies. And also considering we don't have some sort of high AI that just can, you know, develop some real autonomous artificial intelligence. And also, I will have a few more questions. So for example, if we're training some algorithm, we are the responsibles for giving it the database, right? So a short comment on the bias point could be, could we limit the risks by not collecting certain types of data in the first place? So for instance, I know the police records involve data, for example, of race and color of eyes and so on. Can we just not collect this data and then therefore not train AI with this sort of data? Can we afford this? This is kind of funny because I once had a German teacher. No, I mean not German, but Dutch teacher. And he was amazed when he arrived in Brazil because he realized that everyone kind of got classified into races. Everyone had declared itself in a certain type of race. And he thought it was weird because by the time you do that, that's kind of a philosophical problem, because by the time you do that, you also segregate society at the same time. So why collect this sort of data? You know what I mean? So my point on the bias is this. And also, last but not least, I also would like to go back a little bit in the previous point of the presentation, because you mentioned about compliance programs based in predictive policing. And my question is, could we benefit from private use of digital compliance programs? And would it be legitimate? I mean, Professor Momsen, that held a previous webinar here, believes that predictive policing should be restricted only to state use. And he argues that because the tensions regarding the use of technology are intensified when it's used by private parties. Because, for example, very often what justifies the use of technology is public interest, but if it's used by a private party, then, I mean, would it be legitimate for a company to use such technology based on its private but yet legitimate interest? Well, I guess that's all. Maybe it's very interesting points, and I would like to hear some comments from you, Professor.
No, thank you so much for these questions. So I presume we have a couple more hours, I guess, to discuss them, or maybe weeks. So I don't know when YouTube will just ignore us. But so again, these were wonderful questions. They were a lot, and I hope that I can at least make some comments on some of them. What I will not so much go into is the EU Commission and its risk-based approach, because it, curiously enough, is mostly on civil liability and not really for state and criminal law. So this is quite interesting just to note, that we still think that the criminal justice system is different. You mentioned what is the right path, and this is, I think, what it's a good reminder that what is, I think, crucial in my eyes is that we need to raise awareness in our societies that it is now high time to discuss these matters of what is right or wrong, because as you can imagine, right or wrong is something which is highly debatable and is open up for debate. I could give you my opinion, but although I'm a professor in Germany, I have still not reached that level of saying that what I think is right is right. Probably I need to develop that kind of self-awareness soon, but no. So what we need is awareness building to discuss on a societal level what we want and not want and how we want to reach it. These are democratic processes of negotiation that we have to run, and this is what we have not seen in the past. So we have this commercialization, this highly, at least in the West, whatever that is, this highly capitalist-driven development of this technology, which has not been checked by public opinion, by democratic institutions. And this is changing a little bit, but still not to the level that we, I think, would need. So debating what is right or wrong is what we need to do on a societal democratic level. And this is what I think is crucial. What is trust? I briefly touched upon that. What we see is a change of trust. We cannot live without trust, I think. It's a means of reducing social complexity in a Luhmannian sense, but I think it is also more. to it. It's probably something that is basic to our societies. But whether we trust one another, like on an interpersonal level, or with trust in institutions, democratic, etc., like we did in the past, seems to change into trust, into certain codes, into data. So this idea of a zero trust society is, in my eyes, the wrong formulation. But what we see is a trust in technology, almost theological in its nature. And this is what we need to discuss, again, on a societal level. But there are some theological elements to that, because technology seems to promise, or does promise, whether on rightly or not is another question. It does promise security and certainty and a certain future. And this is what is appealing to many, which is then also the main issue of your next question, security. And indeed, the central question that we have to raise here is the price of security. So what kind of security do we want? I know it's difficult to bring security and freedom into a zero-sum equation, but nevertheless, there is a certain correlation between more security might actually result in less security and vice versa. And here we really have to see what kind of security we want and how much freedom, especially freedom to deviate, we want in a society at large. Criminal law, as we know it today, is based on a normative promise of certainty: "Thou shalt not kill," or "Thou wilt not be killed." I know I can't do this old English style, but it's a normative promise, and we always know that this promise can and will be broken. We do not live in societies where there is no deviance, no crime. Nevertheless, we trust in the law. But of course, that might be why we lose confidence in it, because there are other ways to make this promise stronger. Of course, what we lose with that is the possibility to deviate. And this is where deviation as a social good, as a positive value, we need to address more openly. Now, with regard to murder or rape, this is really difficult to raise, but let's bring in more controversial topics. If we would live, not today, but say 60 years ago, abortion, homosexual conduct, etc., it was pretty much a consensus that that's all really, really bad. Ergo, if we use data from that time frame, predictions would ensure that these kinds of values would be perpetuated, and only deviance against it helped us to develop our society. And this is what we need to discuss more openly. Vandalism, for example, is vandalism art, or is it just a negation of property rights? And all this has to be discussed more openly, also with regard to use of algorithms. And the price of security is that deviance as a way of developing society might be lost. We, from a cultural pessimist perspective, we would establish a compliance society where deviance is not possible, is made impossible in the first place, and that perpetuates the status quo. Again, do we live in a perfect society where we can do that? Then perfect, but this is the balancing process that we need to bring in. Airplanes, yes, we do trust probably airplanes, or rather we trust in the algorithms that run airplanes. And fun fact is we train pilots so that they trust their algorithms more than their gut feeling. And next fun fact is that in most cases is right. There might be cases where the algorithms run short, and that's when a couple of airplanes crash happens. But again, we do a balancing process. Problem is these algorithms these airplane algorithms run on constant laws of physics, I guess, right? They're complex, no worries, but at least there are some basic equations that you can run them on. So it's physics. Is society runnable by physics as well? The promise of constant laws that are valid throughout time and space, at least in our world or in our part of the universe, is that same holding true for societies? The promise, I think, of some of these technologies is that yes, we can use something equivalent in societies, and there are many proponents, whether openly or not openly, who want to reduce social interactions to calculable means of that we can basically compute. Again, this is of course then giving you certainty, security, etc. Again, this is also, I think, that we in Western democratic societies have to discuss whether we want to conceptualize our society as such, as run by physics, equation to physics, equivalent to physics, or be more open about it. Again, that's not so easy to discuss as it might seem. Can we afford not collecting data? Depends very much on who collects which data, how much trust you put into that data, what you will do with that. Taking your example of, classifying yourself as a certain, race, was it, or a status, you can use that in either in a way to discriminate against you, or you can use it in a way to do the reverse, so positive discrimination or affirmative action programs, which is being discussed also in the criminal justice area, not in Germany, we don't get that, but in the US. So affirmative action would mean in that respect, we don't lock up defendants from sections of the populations that are normally discriminated against. So we let them be. The story there would be there's an African American and a white rapist, and we would say tell the white rapist, well, you go behind bars for 10 years, and we leave the African American for good. Too drastic an example, but in terms of drug offenses, that might make more sense. Very much collides with our intuition that we'd have to look on the individual specifics of the case at hand, that we have to judge the individual in terms of its individual guilt or the harm that she or he has done. So data as such is not bad. How we use data can be that is the real question. And finally, I made the same argument in a piece that I published just recently, that predictive policing, etc., makes things worse once we enter the private area. To then say that we prohibit that. The use of predictive policing on a private basis, I don't know whether that's realistic for so many reasons. including the reason, isn't it a valid argument by employers to check, you know, how dangerous or not dangerous individual employees are? I don't think that prohibitions as such will solve the issue. You see, I'm from Frankfurt, so I always like my discourse, and what I would rather imagine would be more important to discuss, bring into a societal discussion, is what will change by using algorithms on a private basis for predictive policing. My argument is twofold. From a pessimistic point of view, is we establish this idea that individual employees are risks, because this is how compliance works. Compliance is not about, oh, this is my dear employee, which I trust dearly. No, employees in a compliance terminology are risks that need to constant assessment. But this is nothing new. The whole compliance business runs on that premise. And to just prohibit companies to then take the next step and use algorithms to implement that premise doesn't make sense. If we want to make a difference, then we need to discuss the whole compliance issue of delegating this task to private companies, maybe also for symbolical reasons, because the state has noticed that it fails to enforce its normative agendas within a corporation. Then we have to discuss that. Unfortunately, or we had mentioning of Marxian ideology beforehand. So let me be a little neo-Marxian as well. The main problem of compliance is that companies, of course, might set an agenda for committing crimes if it is profitable. And this is because that's the very idea of capitalism, that you have to make money. And then we try to, you know, check and balance it a little bit by compliance programs. I don't know. So either we go full all in, but to prohibit companies from using algorithms to use predictive policing algorithms. I'm not quite sure whether that is the ultimate answer to it. I think there is far more to it. And to take it even one step further, the same. Why would we use it on a societal state level, actually? So why is it okay in that respect? Why is it okay to come up with a presumption of dangerousness? Why come up with the idea that we can run, can and should run individual behavior in terms of the laws of physics? Maybe that is true. Maybe we are all quite predictable to an extent, but the society will change once we have these core assumptions being implemented as our means of running society. And this is what we need to discuss. Sorry for being, that was a little too much, but there was a lot of questions in there. Sorry. So who's next? If we still have time.
Okay. My name is Luis Amendaris. Professor Burchard. It's an honor to be here today, and as always, it's a pleasure to share a couple of ideas with this fantastic team. And well, first of all, I have some comments about 3 points that I find out really interesting. The first is the new technologies and criminal law. We all know that technological innovations supported by information technology and global communication networks, as well as their expansion in recent decades, have to lead to a new sociological paradigm called or named the Society of Information or the Knowledge Society. And for decades, humans have been developing tools, machines capable of performing many of the tasks that we have always been entrusted to people, especially those that require more time and effort. The field of law has not remained on the sidelines of this phenomenon, as many technological innovations have been applied to improve the legal world. Also, it is clear that for example, artificial intelligence and big data are issues that will change the future of the society. That is clear. But the question is how we can adapt these changes progressively and without causing injury or the violation of the freedom of individuals. Just to give an example, there is and there was a big discussion about incorporating robot judges into the judicial system, especially in Germany. It is a topic that has had a great debate, and many academics have opposed to that. However, it is a reality now in some countries, as for example, such as Estonia. Of course, there under certain limits, because it is a beginning of a new era. Also, I would like to comment lines about a principle of guilt, of principle of culpability, that's Schuldprinzip, and the principle of protection of legal interest. In this field, in the field of predictions, the questions arises about punishing someone who has a high probability of committing a crime, similar to the movie Minority Report, of course. But there are several problems or issues with this, as for example, this principle of culpability, the Schuldprinzip, and the requirement of an offense or an offense to the legal interest or the legal good protected. Without these elements, which have a recognition not only in a criminal codes for many countries and not only for the constitution for many countries, there have also a recognition of in many decisions of the high courts here in Latin America and Europe too. It is quite difficult to imagine a liberal criminal law without these principles that directly recognize the freedom of an individual. I know that actually the predictions or this word that you use, the Prediktionsgesellschaft, is that is a big challenge for us, but I'm really interested in how we can adapt this new era or the new phenomenon progressively. I would like to explain a little bit more about compliance, because the okay. The interesting thing here in this point in compliance is that for some years there is analysis. The more important maybe element in this compliance field is the map of the risks or the risk analysis and the selection of subjects or the individuals that are more likely to commit a crime has been carried out not only for people or for example, the compliance officer or the compliance area. This analysis has been carried out also by software, for example, by software or in artificial intelligence in many areas and in many companies. Even here in Peru, I have already the experience to work with that in the past. Of course, the people make this selection, make this process with having in mind many things at a time to make a selection, to make a level of risk in some areas. But the machine depends on the data, and maybe this is an advantage, but also it represents a big challenge for us and for the development of these programs too. The machines are responsible now for selecting the level of reasons that certain crimes are committed in certain subjects or certain individuals in an institution. And at least in the reality, the issue of compliance is largely based on predictions that obviously have a certain impact on the freedom of individuals. This is these are my comments. Again, I am really happy to be here, and it's a big honor for me to share this panel with the professor, with many people that I have already know, as Mateus, Professor Eduardo, Joao, Marcelo Acevedo. It's a big honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your question. I try to be as sparse with my references to established concepts of criminal law as possible, for two reasons. First of all, I think in order to appreciate, to understand, and also to explore what is happening at the moment, we have to be open. So it's really difficult to conceptualize these developments in traditional terms like culpability, autonomy, etc. So in the first place, I try to describe this stuff without references to these traditional principles. The second reason why I did not really raise them is that we really have to question them as well, because these developments, as we see them now with the introductions of predictive technology into the criminal justice system, shows that these traditional principles might not be as benevolent and as liberal as we would have them in the first place. So make this, on the other hand, it also helps us to rethink them and maybe try to reform them into the better. So that as a pretext. To concretely answer to the question of what will be, the future of autonomy, of culpability principle, maybe also presumption of innocence, etc. We really have to be aware of the fact that, for example, autonomy as probably the principle that, or the freedom of the individual, is something that is notoriously challenged by these technologies, can be challenged, put it that way. If we want to use them in a certain way, they are fundamentally challenged. Autonomy is a constant threat of deviation. Autonomy is something which we need to check and balance. Autonomy is that which brings about crime and deviance. Ergo, in that narrative, let's check it, make it, hedge it. So if someone uses her autonomy to commit a crime, this is when we need to come in. If someone uses her autonomy to recommit after being already convicted, let's go in and inhibit rather her using autonomy to harm society. So autonomy in that story is not what we used to think of it as something positive, as an expression of individual freedom, as the possibility to develop openly into an open future. It's a threat, and this is how autonomy, I think, in a very pessimistically thought predictive society might turn into. And look to China. This is where things are pretty easy to observe. Autonomy is nothing positive. It's the reverse. So these technologies have to motivate us to truly discuss these issues on a societal level. But I think it is quite a little bit strange to notice that the way we do today express autonomy is to lock people up on the assumption that they are culpable for something. So the idea that we express autonomy in a society of autonomous individuals is then to use criminal law to govern it is in my eyes a strange consequence. So only because we want to uphold autonomy, I'm not quite sure whether we have to do that through the criminal law. So again, we have to rethink our status quo. We have to rethink our current also shortcomings of the liberal state in light of what might happen in the future. So let's use that to openly discuss not only some, dystopias, Hollywood style or real style of the future, but to truly reflect on the status quo as well. The presumption of innocence, that being said, culpability principle. Culpability principle, on the one hand, has then its merits. It helps us to come up with a society which is based on pure risks, but it's also in a neo-Marxian reading a way of obfuscating power that is used against individuals. So that is the reason why I'm really hesitant to analyze everything through these classical principles. What else? One nice example, just to see what this whole using predictive technologies in the criminal justice system would mean. Now, if we are really true to that narrative, we might need to actually delete that traditional understanding of criminal law in the first place. At least this, backward-looking repressive rationale. So think about a case where you, by chance, identify a dangerous individual who has just committed a very minor offense. But the predictions tell you that this person is super dangerous for the society. And of course, let's assume, for the sake of the argument, that the prediction is sound. It runs on a democratically checked code. It runs on data that was purged of biases. It runs on data that is huge. So there is of course distortions, but let's just, for the sake of the argument, say that is a sound prediction. Why the hell would you need a criminal trial for that minor offense? So why don't we lock that person up for good? Because we know, in inverted commas, we know the prediction, super high risk score. So what we basically do is we transform the criminal law into something which is not repressing crime of the past, but what is using incidents of deviation to look more closely into individual risk scores, and then govern society through that. Now, if you want to call that criminal law, fair enough. That is, that's a conceptual discussion that we can have. But what is essential is we run society on risk scores, on predictions, on trust in algorithms, on presumptions of possible dangerousness, on the need to evaluate and assess the risks of individuals. We consider autonomy as something that can be used for good or bad. And if it's used for bad, then we have to react to that. Ex post facto, we do not really explore the reasons, the causes of why this person is dangerous. We do not fight causes of deviance or future dangerousness. We suppress the symptoms. This is the society that is at stake here. And this is, I think, the level that we need and should discuss. So we need to discuss the social and the political of the criminal law far more closely. If it helps us to use traditional principles like autonomy, culpability, legal values, Rechtsgutprinzip, etc., fair enough. But I think we need to raise the stakes and discuss it on a far more foundational political level, because this is, at least how I see things, is that society drives the law, the criminal law, very much, and so this is also a important dimension to AI and predictions. This is not a phenomenon that is, solely located in the criminal law. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Banking, everything you can run on this kind of technology, and that is why it's so important to discuss not only the criminal law, but to discuss it on a far bigger, far more foundational level.
I really appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think Mateus has one question left. Mateus, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Thank you so very much, João. Thank you so very much, Professor Burchard. It's always harder to be the last one, because I know people here in Brazil already want to go to lunch, and you are here for so long, Professor, and I didn't want to take so much of your time, but I have some, I swear I have some good and legit interest here. I swear. So I have
ask the question, please.
I have only two questions. The first one is one linked to my work, because I work here in a hub of AI and data science in the Rio de Janeiro DA office. So that could be said. And I work as a product owner, business analyzer, and so on. But I am also a lawyer. So and I'm doing my PhD in criminal law. And this is sometimes I don't have another issue to research. This is the obvious one. So my first question is, of all the problems we have been discussing about technology and criminal law, we have so much about autonomous cars, AI judges, and so on. And I am quite doubtful if these are the real issues. Everything you said here in the lecture today was so much good for me, because those are real problems that really they annoy me. And we are in this moment that is so much like when we were cloning, and we were about to clone a human person, and then everyone came out and said, no, this is too much, we don't want to do this. And we are in this level about this thing of predictive justice and policy and so on. And there is one kind of technology that is, well, every technology needs the data input to do this output of decision. And in all the cases, you have done such a real good appointment about, we have this problem with individuals, these technologies that are talking about individuals. And this is the biggest problem, because when we talk about places, it's quite easier. But when we talk about individuals, it's quite hard to work on it. And the data input in this kind of algorithms, it's usually images by cameras that do facial recognition. That's the great point of facial recognition, why we are so worried about it. And I am really worried about it, because I don't see any use of facial recognition if it's not too invasive or too problematic. or if it's not this much invasive because we have some kind of business and so on and so on, it's inside house. It shouldn't be a problem, but yes, it is, because we still have the problem of false positives, false negatives. And how do we deal with it? Is there any legit use to facial recognition? And the other question is one that you almost touched it when you answered, Luis, my great friend Luis. I miss him. Hey, Luis, hope you are fine, man, around there. And well, you talked about autonomy in some way. And we have Professor Susana Aires that says that it's not autonomy. She uses the term, I have even written it, it's only in predictability. You can't predict what's the decision. It's not true autonomy about the machine. She says that. And I am quite curious, because what do you think about the autonomy of machinery? And I'm not only talking about AI, because people talk too much about AI, but we have this level of programmation, if and else's, that is so hard and deep that they call, my friends that do the programming, they call it heuristics, because it's too complex. And even they can't predict how it will decide, even though they have done all the programmation. So this kind of technology, is there some kind of autonomy, or is it only in predictability? And if it's only a problem of, oh, it's not predictable, if we have some kind of good frameworks to work with the technology, and we have this product liability to the ones that are doing this, because even though I have friends who know how to program, I'm not doing these autonomous cars. Obviously, it's Tesla, it's Volkswagen, it's Google with Waymo and so on. So if we have this kind of product liability, and we have this minimal regulation about training, testing, and frameworks that should be used, is there really a problem if we say there is no autonomy, but only the problem of predictability?
Okay, so thank you so much for these questions, which indeed open up even more horizons to talk about. Where to start? So I'm not sure whether we are in the same stage as the clones, because the way AI works is far more hidden, I guess. Like if we clone a human, that probably brings a lot of emotions from very different backgrounds, religious, but also social, and the way these machines work is not as overt as the cloning of a human being, and that is also why we don't really know, and maybe we don't really want to know, what is actually going on. Whilst with cloning, that is just probably to many of us like such a overt transgression. There many will agree that this goes too far. With AI, it's only the next development, and we are not on the Terminator level yet. So this was just an immediate reaction to your cloning example. Now, facial recognition, that's a very good case study. Again, I did not really touch upon it because it's yet again a topic of its own, I guess. Again, I think there are, as usual, the intrinsic and the extrinsic reactions to it. Intrinsical, in terms of where we are today, is that these machines are being used on a grand scale. They produce outcomes that are very good in certain with certain target groups, and that is especially white male persons, because the training data came from that, while the African American or the African darker skin training data was seemingly not sufficient, so that the outcome is also with regard to females, by the way, is not as precise as with regard to male Caucasian person intrinsically. And the external dimension of it, I think there's a lot of literature of how widespread facial recognition changes the way we live together. Again, it creates certain areas that are supervised, and it then probably drives deviance away from these surveyed into the unsurveyed areas. It creates false senses of security. It produces and is premised on the idea that only surveillance is capable of creating security. We again lose these foundational issues of space being something that we can enter based on interpersonal trust, etc., etc. So these are the issues that we need to address on a foundational level with regard to facial recognition. Once we have facial recognition results in the system, we need to reflect upon how much we trust them, which then relates to their precision or imprecision. There has been a recent case where an African American male person was being identified by facial recognition software as a criminal, and had really difficulties to get out of the whole procedure, because it was obviously wrong. But once it's in the system, it of course prompts a criminal investigation against her or him. Then she's, or in this case he, was in the system and will ever be in the system. So this is also a problem that we need to address, probably, but that is not so much different from other scientific means of coming up with evidence, DNA, etc., etc. So we can and should learn from the past in that respect, and that there are false positives possible in that respect as well. The final question, now we talk about autonomy of the machine, is that correct? More or less. That is a topic, indeed, yet another topic that we can discuss, the autonomy of the machine, or at least the liability that we ascribe to the machine as such, or to producers of the machine. So self-driving cars, autonomous cars, or however you want to call that. I'm not, like, with regard to the culpable or the autonomous machine as such. So my friends from the information technology department tell me that we are not there yet. Not really. So this is something that we can discuss on a theoretical level at the moment, while the phenomena that I was talking about, they are already in place, and they are changing the way we live together, and they transform our society, our law at this moment. And I think they have the potential to truly revolutionize, positive or negatively, the way we live together. So we probably have to discuss them on different levels. Once the singularity happens and machines become autonomous, we should have some fail-safes in place, whether we want that, and if they do become self-aware, how to deal with them, or whether you want to commit, I don't know, genocide against them, I don't know, prohibit or inhibit that will happen. But this is something, again, something else, I guess, from what we see at the moment. But it's linked in that way that if we already now transform into a different society, which will transform our society in the next 10 to 15 years. And then the singularity will happen, I don't know, in the 30s or 40s, so let's say in 20 years. It's really difficult to then think about today of how a society in 20 years' time will deal with autonomous, artificially intelligent agents. So this is a problem, I think. We can discuss that at the moment, but it sounds very much science fictionally. But even if we remove that from the agenda, I think it's even more difficult to predict how things will develop, and then predict how a society in 20 years will deal with autonomous agents, autonomous artificially intelligent agents in the future. So this is to make it's a further complication. At the moment, these machines are certainly not autonomous in the way we normally use that terminology, and the problem is rather that we can't look into them and can't really, well, in many cases, we cannot explain why they did what they did. Or rather, we cannot explain, to be more technical, and this is important, to be very technical, we cannot explain of why a certain input was then computed into a certain output. And why do I say that in these technical formulations? Because once we say something like, we cannot explain how they acted, or we cannot explain how they decided, we already ascribe very human characteristics to them. So I'm very much in favor of being very neutral and technological in that sense, and say we cannot explain how input got transformed into output. Now, and that is called the black box problem. So black box, we can't look into it. So the technological answer to that would be, yeah, but we are working on more explainable AI, more white box systems, and this is being done. It's a big topic today. So XAI, explainable AI, is the big thing today. Probably it's already too much hyped. So if you really want to get research money, you have to find the next topic. But XAI is super important at the moment. And the idea is that we use technology to explain to observers of what is happening, either natural language, or that we at least can make what is happening more understandable and appreciable. So that is transforming the black box into the white box. The interesting counter argument against the black box being a problem is, well, with humans, that's the same. With judges, you know, I have never seen a white box human judge. What judges, where we can really look into the brains of the judge and understand what is happening. And if there is a bench of judges, 3 persons, at least in Germany, their decision making is secret, and it's even a crime if someone reveals what is happening in camera. The human in the criminal justice system is very often a black box, but we don't have a problem with that. And that's curious because that is where bias comes in and everything. So the black box argument to challenge the use of artificial intelligence in the criminal justice system is of course it's easy to make, but it follows it brings about a lot of follow-up questions. So why do we trust humans more than machines? And do we actually do that? Like in Europe, Germany, probably yes. In the US, I don't know. If you're, as I said, an African-American in front of a white judge, you might want to say, well, I don't trust that black box white man judge. I rather want a black box AI. This depends on context. And the last point that you made is now, if we have this non-autonomous machines that transform input into output, where in many cases we really cannot see what is happening, which have this black box features, do we need product liability, producer liability? And that, I think, is a valid question, one that is the traditional inverted commas. I think that is what is being discussed today, mostly about AI in criminal law. So when an autonomous car crashes, who is responsible, who is criminal responsible, etc., etc. And there's a lot of literature on that, and probably we could have a couple of seminars on that to make a very long discussion very short. I think that's an incredibly important discussion that is to be made, but it's not what I'm really interested about, because we normally use our traditional methods of ascribing or not ascribing criminal responsibility to programmers, producers, whatnot. What we should not forget when doing so is that by doing so, we are again already changing the way we live together. Like if we all use autonomous cars, and I would love to have an autonomous car because I hate driving. So if we all use autonomous cars, the way we travel, the way space is constructed changes dramatically. And of course it has huge implications for economy, etc. as well. So over discussing product liability for autonomous cars, we should not forget that by doing so we are in course of changing our society. In my case, again, I would love to have that autonomous car very, very soon, perfect. But we have to discuss these more foundational issues as well. And at the moment, I think what we are doing is we are trying to ascribe some kind of sorry, that's a telephone and I can't really turn that out. Still probably recognizable in the back, but it's not my mobile phone. That is on silent mode, but that's like the normal house phone. So and that's all on YouTube now. Great. For all the future generations, and will be used for predictive policing myself in the future. So where was I? In discussing criminal responsibility at the moment, what I think we are again shifting responsibility mainly on individuals. So, you know, the individual producer, the individual programmer, or the individual driver, etc., etc. But in effect, that is only an enabling factor in introducing these cars to our mobility world, because I think most of us or societies want these cars as soon as possible, obviously, and there's a certain risk, so let's hedge that risk. And if someone gets killed by the autonomous car, so be it. But we will ascribe individual responsibility to someone. But we accept that risk from happening, and this is what we need to discuss very openly. That people will get killed by autonomous cars, which will not work properly. But that is probably, from a very utilitarian perspective, what societies accept. Maybe also because the promise is that by killing a couple of people now, we will prevent people in the future from being killed, because that's the beauty of AI. It learns from its problems. And again, it's a different level of discussion, but I think it should also be there.
Thank you so very much, Professor.
So thank you so much, Professor Christoph. I mean, we had an amazing webinar. We really hope that we have the pleasure to hear from you on next webinars too, and possibly a seminar here in Brazil, maybe in the future. And it was a really great presentation that raises us important questions on this topic. In the name of the Business and Human Rights Working Group, we thank you so much for the presentation, for your time, for answering all of our questions. And I thank to our great audience, our debaters and colleagues. And I forgot to greet Dr. Marcelo, who was here, like the presence too here who is also director of the National School of Public Prosecutors here in Brazil. And I just want to mention again that we have a series of webinars going on, and we look forward to have all of you there too. So I would like to thank you all, and thank you again, Professor Christoph.
It's my pleasure, and it was amazing. And as I said in the very beginning, it's always great to learn, and this is what I did. And so I'm very much looking forward to future discussions with you and your group. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Burchard.
And bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
you,
everyone.
If you have any
Bye-bye.
questions, feel free to write me an email.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. Have a nice night. Thank you.
All right.